This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from San Francisco, where California Governor Jerry Brown's Global Climate Action Summit officially begins today. The conference occurring just days after Brown signed a new law to shift California to 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045.
No understating the importance of this measure. SB 100 is sending a message to California and to the world that we're going to meet the Paris Agreement, and we're going to continue down that path to transition our economy to zero emission, zero carbon emission, and to have the resiliency and the sustainability that science tells us we must achieve. California is committed to doing whatever is necessary to meet the existential threat of climate change. And yes, it is an existential threat. No matter what the naysayers may say, it is a real present danger to California and to the people of the world. This bill and others I'm going to sign this week help us go in this direction. But have no illusions. California and the rest of the world have miles to go before we achieve zero carbon emissions.
While Governor Jerry Brown has often been hailed a climate hero, he's also been widely criticized by many climate justice activists who are planning to protest outside the opening of today's summit, for example. During Saturday's Rise for Climate, Jobs and Justice March, I spoke with Doria Robinson, the executive director of Urban Tilth and a member of Our Power Richmond Coalition, criticizing the governor's embrace of cap and trade.
Because of some recent rules, we can't put a cap on how much pollution that is because of what Jerry Brown and everyone in the state government here did. And so that means that people can buy the right to basically pollute and injure our health, right? Like, we're sacrificed for their gain. We don't get anything for it. You know, they build their wealth and their empires.
That's just one of the criticisms. Still with us, Bill McKibben, the co-founder of 350.org. His latest piece for The Nation magazine is headlined, Jerry Brown's Climate Legacy is Still Being Decided. Bill McKibben's 1989 book, The End of Nature, was the first book for a general audience about climate change. His forthcoming book, Falter, has the human game begun to play itself out. Bill, it's great to have you with us. It's right before a protest outside the climate summit. Now, many in the country and the world see Governor Brown as the green opposition to President Trump. But the tens of thousands of people that marched on Saturday, there was a massive amount of criticism of him, calling him a climate fraud.
So the answer lies somewhere in between. On the demand side of the climate equation, on the question of reducing the amount of energy we use and supplying it renewably, Brown has been good. There's no question that, along with a few other world leaders, California, under Governor Schwarzenegger, under Governor Brown, has taken really strong steps. And for obvious reason, it's the heart of where new technological innovation is coming from, and it's got lots and lots and lots of sunlight. The criticisms are coming in large measure from what he hasn't done, which is do anything at all about the other side of the energy equation, the supply side. California, as you know, is a big oil and gas state, though given the size of California's economy, it's a negligible part of the GDP. But it's not a negligible part of life for people who live next to, literally next to, oil wells, homes, schools, hospitals. A coalition of 800 community groups asked Brown to stop granting new permits and to take away those wells that are right next to where people, obviously people of color, low-income people, tend to live. So far, Brown's been unresponsive to that keep-it-in-the-ground demand. In fact, you'll recall last year when one protester raised the question of keeping it in the ground, he turned to him with the pithy response, let's put you in the ground.
Well, I want to go to that moment because Democracy Now! Had just flown into Bonn. We went to one of these mass protests outside, and many Native Americans were coming up to me, and they were describing this. Governor Brown was speaking, and he was disrupted by a group of Native Americans who were protesting fracking, and they were shouting, keep it in the ground, Brown defending. So I got to Governor Brown later that day, and I said to him, when they said keep in the ground, and he said keep you in the ground if he would apologize to the Native Americans. This is what he said.
Come on, you know that in California, we have the strongest Native American policy of any state in the country. And we have the most environmental, and we have the toughest rules on oil. I don't think we should shut down oil in California and then take it from Venezuela or take it from places where the rules are even worse. We have to stop the cars. We have to get electric. We have to get public transportation. We need better land use. We've got to solve the problem. And I understand because we deal with protests all the time. But California, we are cutting our oil consumption, we're cutting our greenhouse gases. That's what we have to do, not just a slogan or a march around or talk. I'm talking about reality. And California has the strongest oil reduction rules in America. We're the ones, we're the leader. If someone wants to say, oh, get rid of oil, you mean get rid of our cars. If you got rid of cars, you would have a revolution and there'd be shooting in the streets.
So that's Governor Brown, who's leading this climate action summit today, with people massively protesting outside this morning. Yeah,
I mean, one wants very much to be able to say to Jerry Brown, thank you and well done as he leaves office. But he's in a unique position to take leadership here precisely because he's leaving office. He never has to run again. He doesn't need the millions of dollars in contributions from the fossil fuel industry that he's taken in the past. He really could be the guy now, like Emmanuel Macron in France or Prime Minister Jardin in New Zealand, to simply say, we're not going to take more oil out of the ground. We don't need it. We're moving in a different direction. If he did that, his climate legacy on both fronts would be cemented.
So talk specifically about what you'd like to see coming out of this Global Climate Action Summit. And for people who don't even understand what's happened, I mean, it's been coming together for a few months. We know the UN climate summits all over the world every year that take place in November and December. This is something new.
Right. The theory here is that after Donald Trump withdrew America from the Paris Accords, one of the truly shameful pieces of diplomatic action that America's ever taken, that other people needed to show that they were still engaged on this issue of climate change.
Under the banner, we're still in.
Some of them using that banner. And so they are assembling now representatives of state and local governments to say, here are the steps we're going to take. And that's a very good thing to be doing. We do need to try and reassemble the momentum we had after Paris. But remember that the goal here is not to be Paris compliant. It's not. The goal here is to deal with the physics and chemistry of climate change. And one big part of doing that is stopping the supply of these fossil fuels, at least not expanding their operation. So all anybody asked was that he stop granting new permits and start taking out those wells that are right next to people's houses. So far, no real response on that. The other, of course, thing to realize and that people are working on hard here at the summit is around the question of money supply. Money is the oxygen on which the fire that is global warming burns. And we're working hard to try and staunch that supply. The good news, the best news I've heard all week is that the new totals for the divestment, fossil fuel divestment campaign reached $6 trillion in endowments and portfolios.
Wait, now explain this again when you talk about divestment.
We've asked for the last 5 years for institutions to sell their holdings in coal and oil and gas. This was modeled on the divestment campaign in the midst of South African apartheid. But it's now much larger than that campaign because, I mean, as of August, entire countries, Ireland in this case, were announcing that they were divesting from fossil fuel. New York City, London, their mayors put out a challenge on Monday to mayors of all the other big cities in the world. They said, we're divesting from fossil fuel, time for everyone to take this step.
What about here in San Francisco?
San Francisco has not done it yet, surprisingly. California, as I say, remains in the grip often of coal and oil and gas interests. But one assumes that San Francisco will eventually take this step. The problem is the eventually. We don't have a hell of a lot of time left to deal with the crisis that we're in. You were showing those pictures from Greenland a minute ago. I was up there helping them film, and I got to say, it is sobering even for someone who's worked as long on this as I have, to stand there and almost literally in real time watch those glaciers disappear into the sea. It's a reminder that doing anything less than all we can do is not okay at this point. And so that means we need Governor Brown to step up. And if he won't do it, we need Governor Newsom after him to step up, and the same all over the world. I will say that another piece of good news came late last week when the senator from Oregon, Mr. Merkley, introduced a bill in the Senate that would divest the federal government's pension funds from fossil fuel. It obviously is not going to pass right away, but it's a marker now laid down in this fight.
Do you feel encouraged by the movements that have drawn strength from what President Trump has done, this climate change denying president, among other things?
Well, look, I mean, one of the problems with Trump is that he's done so many bad things that we have to work on so many things at once. I mean, standing up for immigrants, maybe most crucially. But climate change is the thing that we'll never, ever get another crack at, you know. The years that we waste here are years that are tipping us into a kind of permanent climate chaos. And we should stop acting surprised when bad things happen as a result. I mean, it's horrifying to think of people having to somehow flee this hurricane, Florence, which looks like it may kind of stagger along the coast for 2-3 days, pouring record amounts of water, probably amounts of water nothing like we've ever seen before. Someplace around the world now, we use that phrase every day, like something we've never seen before.
As we wrap up, your new book will be called Falter: Has the Human Game Begun to Play Itself Out? 30 years ago, you write the climate change defining book, The End of Nature, where you talked about the two paths, the defiant reflex and the more humble way of living. Talk about what gives you hope now and what this book is about.
Well, the book is dark, it must be said, because there's an awful lot we haven't done and because our politics are so messed up. I mean, the fruit of a libertarian, every man for himself world, one of them turns out to be that the temperature goes up a few degrees. What gives me hope is the movement that's arisen. You know, there were tens of thousands on the street here in San Francisco on Saturday, but there were also people in huge demonstrations at 900 or 1,000 other places around the world. Some of them massive 50,000 people in Paris, and some of them incredibly beautiful and in places that that your audience might not expect. 35,000 people turned out in Kampala, Uganda, where they're feeling the effects so powerfully.
Will you be outside at the protest today?
Yes, that's where I'm headed from the studio here.
And then inside as well?
No, they haven't given me a badge to go inside. I think I may have criticized the governor just a little too harshly.
Well, Bill McKibben, I want to thank you for being with us, co-founder of 350.org. We'll link to his piece in The Nation, Jerry Brown's Climate Legacy is Still Being Decided. And that does it for today's show. I'll be speaking in Boulder, Colorado on Saturday night. That is September 15th. Check it out at democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Is job opening for broadcast engineer. Democracy Now! Is produced by an amazing group of people. Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.